All right, welcome to this week's episode of Weirdos Like Me. I am your chief weirdo, Dr. Shannon. All right, so segueing off of our last episode, I want to dive deeper today into emotional regulation, emotional intelligence, and what the heck any of that has to do with being an introvert and or an empath and what it all means, okay? So it's actually a lot. Now, when an empath connects with somebody, an empath truly connects. And I'm going to go back and forth between saying empath and we, because I'm kind of classifying myself in that category. And I'm going to also throw some of my experience in there too. Now, there is this misconception that tends to come up where people think that introverts are antisocial and that introverts don't like making friends or being with people. That is absolutely not true. Introverted people enjoy friending, maybe a smaller number of people, but when you're an introvert and you pair that with being an empath, you really may have just a few people that you consider a true friend, because to you, a friend is separate and distinct from an acquaintance. A friend is somebody who you can deeply, genuinely connect with and that you can go to when you need to share something, free of judgment. And you want your friends to consider you somebody that they can pour their heart out to also, because you really, really get it as an introverted empath. It's actually quite fascinating when you start to analyze how people label categories of people in their lives, and you can start to kind of link up and correlate maybe whether they're an introvert or an extrovert, and what they might classify themselves as based on how they categorize people. For example, introverts may only label a couple of people a friend, while extroverts probably refer to numerous people as their friends. An introvert, especially one that's an empath as well, they feel what other people are feeling. So they may not necessarily want to put that friend label on very many people, because then they feel that once they label somebody as a friend, they are then responsible for really, really connecting with them and understanding their emotions and feeling their emotions when they call somebody a friend. So they're going to whittle that down and concentrate on just a few people that they can really dive deep into connecting with their emotions, versus just kind of scratching the surface of connection with dozens of people. Now, neither one of these is right or wrong. It just is what it is. It's how each individual connects to other people. And it's important to recognize where you are so that you don't attempt to mold yourself into a category that you don't necessarily feel comfortable in. If you know you're an introvert, you don't need to feel guilty that you don't have dozens of people that you consider friends. And if you're an extrovert, you don't necessarily need to feel guilty that you don't have 2 or 3 people that you are like insanely close with, that you have a lot of people in your life that you're comfortable with. Both are okay. It is what it is. You do you, right? Now, as an empath, you can pick up on, recognize, and actually feel the emotional fields of those that you're interacting with. It's kind of like tuning an old school radio. And I can't believe I'm saying old school radio because I used this as a kid, but it's one of those dial station radios where you have to turn the dial and you tune in to find a clear station, right? So you guys remember those things? So empaths can tune in to the emotional frequencies of others much easier than someone who's not an empath. They can turn that dial and they can get that much quicker than most people who are like turning and scanning and they just can't tune in. So this allows you to read people rather quickly. And because you're feeling when people are in turmoil and you feel when they need help, you tend to be the first person to jump into the rescue to help people around you. Now, as an empath, you are physically feeling the same emotions and experiencing the same physiology and the same reactions that we talked about in the last episode when you are interacting with someone in distress that they are physically feeling themselves. This is most likely painful to you because if they're in pain, you're in pain. So naturally, you want to help get them out of turmoil. Now, let me pause for a second. I'm talking about this in regards to pain because a lot of times those are the really strong emotions that empaths have a hard time knowing what to do with. However, don't get me wrong, empaths also experience good emotions very well. Okay. So you actually exponentially experience joy and happiness. And when other people are happy, you're going to tune into that and you're going to feel their happiness and their joy as well. So again, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying empaths only feel the negatives. It's just that a lot of times it's easy to feel other people's joy. It's not so easy to feel other people's distress. So in one way, this is a gift, right? As an empath, you can help so many people by recognizing their emotions and knowing, what they're feeling and how to help with it. On the other hand, it's so important to set healthy boundaries for yourself as an empath so that you're not constantly helping people while maybe inadvertently hurting yourself in the process, or maybe not consciously hurting yourself, but maybe just neglecting yourself over and over and over. And that's going to eventually lead to hurting yourself. I don't want to get too much into this in this episode, but I do want to touch on the fact that empaths are notorious for getting caught up with narcissists, which is kind of like a hot topic nowadays. So narcissists can manipulate feelings and situations, and they know how to cause extreme feelings of guilt. And as an empath, you are wired to feel that pain and that guilt. And you are wired to want to help, even if that means neglecting or hurting yourself in the process, like we just said. Now, I'm talking about like pathological narcissism here. Okay. I'm not just talking about, somebody wants ice cream, so they make you feel guilty to go to the store for it as a joke. Like, I mean, pathological levels. So this is an extreme that I'm referencing, but I'm referencing the extreme only to make my point that as an empath, you do have to learn how to set healthy boundaries, or you run the risk of emotionally burning yourself out, or worse, potentially becoming part of, maybe an abusive situation, not necessarily physical. It can be emotional, or it can be both. Now, what happens if you are an introverted empath who doesn't know how to set healthy boundaries for yourself? You may then set a pseudo boundary, or as I like to call it, like a fake boundary is what I mean by pseudo boundary, because your body is going to try to set a boundary no matter what. Now, this fake boundary, though, is basically like pulling out that Captain America shield that I was talking about in the last episode, when you encounter a situation and then you pretend that you're blocking that emotion, that you're not feeling it. And cognitively, you actually convince yourself that you're not sad, that you're not angry, you're not scared, whatever that emotion is that you are kind of in denial about. And that fake boundary is lying to yourself about what it is. But remember, no matter how much you lie consciously to yourself, you can't fool your subconscious, and you can't you can't fool and lie to your physiology. So that's just getting stored inside as you're consciously lying to yourself about it. Now, this could be part of the reason that empaths have tendencies to experience a lot of physical ailments, things like digestive problems, pain, autoimmune issues. And part of my thought process and theory behind all of it is because as empaths, we tend to pick up on everyone else's stress frequencies, and then we run to the rescue to help, as many people as we can. But we don't really know what to do to help integrate what our bodies and what our physiologies are now feeling and experiencing as we are encountering and helping kind of mitigate all these emotional fields around us. Unless you study and learn and build strategies in your system and take care of your nervous system, you don't know how to do that. It's not common knowledge necessarily. It's like that suitcase that we were talking about in the last episode. You keep piling on and in it. Oh my God, words are hard for me today, guys. You keep piling in other people's clothing until the suitcase bursts open. You got to do something about those clothes at some point. Now, sometimes as an empath, you may experience a physical reaction to somebody else's emotional state. And the best example I can think of this is, because most people have experienced this at some point, walking into a room and then you feel this heaviness in the air. And, you look at everybody's face, everyone seems okay. Like nobody's sobbing in the corner crying, but you know that something is just off. And how many people have said that to you, or you've said it to other people, like something just doesn't feel right about today. I don't know what it is. It's just something's weird. Now, chances are you're picking up on somebody else's emotional field, and your nervous system is talking with their nervous system. And you're not consciously aware of this conversation, but your body sure is aware of it. And your emotional field is aware of this. Having a high level of emotional intelligence is allowing yourself to be aware of this occurring and not immediately shutting it down, and also not engaging in it to a point where it negatively affects the rest of your day. We have all at some point had some experience where there's somebody else around us that, might be in a bad mood, and then we let it affect us. And then we just have a terrible day, the whole day. Like something could happen at 8 a.m. and it's 6 p.m. and we're saying to ourselves, oh, well, this happened at 8 o'clock this morning and it's just been a bad day ever since. Now, you have to learn how to navigate between the highs and the lows, and you need to know when it's appropriate to feel and engage in others' emotional fields and when it's appropriate to not engage in those. Always getting extremely negatively affected by others' emotions is not healthy. And never getting affected by others' emotions is also not healthy. There's an ebb and a flow here. And the more that you take care of your nervous system, the better and easier it is for your conscious brain to switch things on and off at appropriate times. Adaptability, it's what you need to be able to go back and forth between these different states. So let's think about this for a minute. Introverts tend to live in their heads, right? So we ruminate on thoughts and we carefully think things through. Empaths tend to deeply feel the emotions of others and ruminate in those emotions, like they're feeling it themselves. So what happens when you put the two together? When you put an introvert and an empath together? Not two different people. Let me clarify that. When you put those two characteristics together in one person, I should say, you are internally living and feeling what everybody else around you is going through over and over and over again, potentially. Now, this can be a recipe for disaster if you don't know how to properly deal with it. This is why sometimes it's easier as a defense mechanism to tell yourself that you just don't care than to dive in and process and heal all of these things. And let me just throw a wrench in here. Some of these things may not even be your own things. Now, there's this concept of epigenetics, right? And if you have talked to me for more than 5 minutes, you probably have heard this word. And it also correlates with emotions and emotional trauma. So did you know that you could actually be experiencing emotional trauma from things you never experienced, at least physically? Let me say that. So because of these epigenetic shifts that can happen in your DNA and in your nervous system, when you experience trauma, we can actually imprint the physiology of these traumas into our DNA that can get potentially passed to our children, to our grandchildren, to our great grandchildren, whatever. I think I skipped a great somewhere in there, and so on and so forth, until somebody in that line decides to kind of stop everything in its track and heal those traumas. So somebody needs to process that emotional trauma for it to stop getting passed down in a negative way, to kind of turn that around in a positive light. So, this is honestly, I hate playing the blame game. And a lot of times that happens with some of these traumas too. So a lot of people are aware that this happens, but then we're going to blame it on everybody else. I don't care personally if your trauma came from your mom, your great grandmother, your aunt, uncle, fairy godmother, the tooth fairy, whoever it was. I don't care. Epigenetics does not mean that we sit there and blame whoever did whatever and just sit there and just do that forever. What it means is we now have the power to change that for future generations. So if this is the case, we need to step up and heal potentially generations of unhealthy emotional intelligence in our system. unless you just want to check out and just pass it on to your kids. I mean, I don't know. It's up to you, I guess. Everyone has the right to do what they want. Now, if you're an introverted empath, what can you do to make sure that you stay emotionally healthy and that you take care of yourself as you're experiencing these things in life? Because we don't live in a bubble, right? Like, you are going to go out there, you're going to encounter other people, encounter their emotions, and you just have to take care of yourself so that you can process it correctly. So first and foremost, like we touched on before, you have to set healthy boundaries. I did an entire podcast on this several episodes back. So some of those tips are going to be golden for, helping you start that journey to set boundaries so that you're not getting inundated with all these negative emotions. Another important thing for empaths, especially introverted ones, is something called grounding. Now, pause. Let me stop right there, because I am potentially seeing some of you roll your eyes. I could have just done a really bad empath joke right there, but I guess I kind of did, but I'm going to stop. Anyway, because I know when somebody first told me about grounding and empaths, my initial thought was sitting there. I was like, do you want me to go out in the middle of the forest and sit, crisscross applesauce in a loincloth, chewing on some tree bark, going for an hour? And that was my very judgmental first thought about saying that I needed to ground myself. Okay. Now, technically, yes, you can do all of that. And there's nothing wrong with it. Some people, that works really, really well for them. Doesn't work really, really well for me, at least not currently. And I am aware that things change and people grow and evolve. But for right now, that just doesn't do it for me. Okay. So that was one of those blanket examples and judgments that I took in a long, long time ago. And, I was like, that's just crazy. And I dismissed everything even remotely related to the concept, much to my own demise. Now, in my experience, at least, you don't have to be sitting in the middle of a forest, wearing a loincloth, meditating, eating tree bark to ground yourself. Water is also very grounding. So this is why a lot of people feel super relaxed and they feel steady when they're, by an ocean or by a lake. And if you don't have access to a large body of water like that, even doing something like taking a bath or a shower can help. So one of the things that I found for me is I always had this tendency to want to shower at night, never first thing in the morning. Never really knew why. But now that I'm learning about this grounding thing with introverted empaths, I actually think it's part of restoring my energetic balance. So showering at the end of the day actually helps ground me from whatever I've encountered throughout that entire day versus doing it opposite. So, maybe it's taking a bath for you, or walking barefoot in the grass, or maybe it's watching the sunset or the sunrise. All of those things can be very grounding depending on you. This isn't a one size fits all thing. So experiment with something, with some element of nature, and then find what works for you. You also need to become aware whether you are experiencing your emotion or if you're experiencing someone else's emotion. So here's the thing. You can absolutely empathize with somebody else who is going through something, and you can help them as much as you can. But at the end of the day, you have to find that balance between helping others and maintaining your space. Oh, and also, PSA, you are allowed to not let people into your space also. If there are toxic people in your life, and I mean legitimately toxic, not just blaming, again, everybody for being quote unquote toxic just because you don't want to learn how to regulate your emotions. But if they are truly toxic and they're poisoning your emotional field, you absolutely have the right to walk away, and you do not need to feel guilty about it. Empaths tend to think that it's their duty and their job to solve the world's problems, but it really isn't. Do what you can and accept what you can't. I hope that makes sense. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode of Weirdos Like Me. And remember to like this, whether you're listening to audio or on YouTube, and subscribe to the channel so you can get updates when I release new content. And here's something I was thinking about too. It's one thing for, us as an introverted empath to understand how we work, right? But we don't tend to work in isolation. So you might have a partner or friends or parents or whoever it is in your life that you want to help understand you a little bit better. Share this with them as well, so they can start to understand, how your mind works and what you need to keep your energy balanced and recharged. And that way, everybody can walk this journey together and we can be our true, authentic selves. So that's it for this week's episode. I will see you guys next week. I am Dr. Shannon. I can't even say my name right. Goodness. Dr. Shannon signing off. See you guys next week.